Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about one-on-ones. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how would you handle if you had a bad one-on-one with your manager? Well, oh no, how would you recover from a bad one-on-one with your manager? Okay. Well, the short answer is that I would remind myself, I would have to first figure out what went wrong, and usually it's one or two things. Either it's that I have a performance problem, like a complaint or something like that, or I'm not really seeing eye to eye on something with my manager, like basically my manager and me were not clicking, or like there's something that feels awkward, or so forth and so forth, in the way that we communicate with each other. And so the fundamental thing that I usually do here, or the way that I usually have solved these problems in the past, is that I try to get information first and foremost and sort of figure out what's not working. Uh, and if we have something like a performance problem or something like that, it's usually the case that either I'm underperforming, like in terms of like how much I produce in terms of code or in some product or something like that. And I always find it simplest to just ask if they can elaborate on sort of what expectations they have and what they would like me to do differently, etc., etc. And then in many cases, it's not the case that they have like concrete things, which is the thing that is very frustrating, because it usually comes back to the thing that I always almost always is the root of the problem. They have a preference in something in one way or the other, and basically they feel so strongly towards that preference that they're going to make it your problem to comply with that preference, even though it might not objectively be the right thing, or the so forth and so forth. They just want you to do things in a certain way. And the quicker we can get to a point where they have explained sort of the conditions, if that makes sense. What are the conditions for like a good solution here, the better. The worst cases is when it's like really just a personality thing, which is the other thing that can happen, which is more common, which makes it, then you can almost always figure that out immediately when you ask, could you give me an example of where I'm underperforming? If they don't give you a straight answer, or like they give you this vague, oh, I think you're a smart person, you sort of know what it is, or oh no, yeah, you've had some problems with, deadlines or whatever, etc., etc. When they don't really have something more concrete than that, it's usually a case of that they're just unhappy with the overall results, or you as a person or something like that. It's a difficult game to play this thing, recovering from this, because it really comes down to like how they, like, it's about emotions usually. It's not about measurable results, because when you face someone who knows exactly where the issues are, and who is informed and competent, they will also very often in these circumstances be able to pinpoint very directly what they had expected, like very clearly express what the results they were looking for and so forth. When they're fussy on those sorts of things, it's just a gut thing. Usually they feel a certain way. And that brings us to the other thing that could go wrong, which is more likely, which is that the complaint has come in or something like that related to like my attitude, or the way that I do code reviews, or something like that. And if that is the situation, I usually solve it. It depends a little bit on the nature of the complaint, because some complaints I don't really like. It's I've found that it's difficult to fight things like that, because it's really down to, at the end of the day, who does your manager believe when these sorts of complaints come in? Who is the problem, and what disposition does this person have? In some cases they're going to side with you, in some cases they're going to side with the person who's making the complaint. And basically, as long as you're getting complaints, that's the thing that you should address. And here it's also very difficult, because when you ask about, okay, what complaints have I gotten, and then it might be like they give you all kinds of fluffy things and so forth. If I note that anything in the realm of oh yeah, you have a negative influence, or you have a strong opinions, or people don't like the way you do code reviews, etc., etc. When it's anything like the personality thing, there is only one and only one way. There, in my opinion, there's only one way to solve that problem, which is to adopt the happy donkey principle, or like that's what I call it at the very least. That's my nickname for that. Tries to portray the corporate mask, or like the social mask that people have to put in order to maneuver through society on society's terms, or like whatever environment you're finding yourself in. And my character that I play is just a happy donkey. So the reason why I use that phrase is because I've found that the way that I can interact with as little friction as possible with people is by being compliant, just as a donkey. I hope that you understand my analogy here. Be compliant, just do pull my weight, do my thing, and basically do whatever anybody wants me to do without friction. I just execute. Make sure that I'm slightly less informed, or like I take on the humbleness there, where like I might come with a quirky idea, but I don't know, maybe this could be an idea. Maybe I never push anything. Like I'm just like slightly less in the, like I'm not a threat to anybody, if that makes sense, or like pushing people and so forth, even if they push me back and misbehave. And then I have a stupid smile on my face as much as possible, and try to include the eyes as well, because it's important to not create a fake smile. You have to create a genuine fake smile that make people feel like, yeah, this person is truly happy, or so forth and so forth. And then have a generally positive attitude, where like you're not like ever saying anything or doing anything that has a area of friction. And the way I try to do that, I practice mindfulness and so forth, where you can sort of entertain yourself and think your own thoughts privately, but you need to make sure that you have that mask established first. The sad part is that this is the way, this to me is a sad part, that this is the most sustainable way I've found to deal with these sorts of complaints. Because the thing that I have to sort of remind myself is that we don't live in a world where, people are just magically going to grow and act with wisdom and prudence and rational thinking and so forth and so forth. And so the best game you can usually play when you're dealing with someone who has an impact on your livelihood is to, if you're lucky, you are in a position where you can have principles, where you can say that, no, I'm not going to deal with this, and move on. In some cases that is the way I would say I would have dealt with it. And in some cases it's sort of like where you're not really not in a position to do that, and then it's the same problem everybody has when you're dealing with someone who has a power imbalance. It's sort of because the problem is that there's no requirement on your manager usually to look into the reality of things, and in many cases all they want is for the problem to go away. And since you are the subject of the issue, like you're the one who's being complained at, it can be more difficult for you to win an argument like that. It really comes down to like who you're dealing with, and like what type of manager and type of company culture you have. In some companies the victims are never and depending on personality, of course, because it's all gut feelings here, guys. It's all all those stories that you've heard, that people are like inclined to not believe a famous person could possibly be guilty of like something horrible. The reason why that happens is because they're so beloved. People don't want to believe it, and then as the victim you're in a bad position. But if you, in other situations, you might be subject to a culture bias, such as I don't know, like a lot of there are some guys who are afraid of working with women because they're scared that they're going to be accused of doing something inappropriate, and all of a sudden, because society is bent right now, like the PC thing is so depending on your part of the world, like the wokeness is at a level where like any accusation is enough for you to basically be labeled as someone who has done it, like the old classic one, there's no fire without smoke type of deal. And so these things can work in both ways, and the only people who survive them usually are the people who are so mainstream in terms of how behave in their behavior, that they don't really have those sorts of issues. If you have if you have that persona on at all times when you're in an environment with people like that, it becomes very difficult for people to believe at the very least, and which is it's going to work in your favor. So these are the two ways that you should deal with it. And honestly, the happy donkey thing works even in the personal one-to-ones. If I'm dealing with a manager who I'm not really clicking with or anything like that, if I can't have like an honest conversation with them, even if they tell me that they want an honest conversation, the beautiful part is that if you never ever drop the mask, which is difficult in some cases, they don't have a baseline, because when they establish a baseline is when it becomes tricky. Because if you establish yourself as being like this outspoken person who like has a lot of opinions, etc., etc., and you start getting a bit of friction, it becomes difficult for you to correct the behavior. And imagine this: if you have if you are committed of a felony, like a really like something that people feel is repulsive, that label will be on you for the rest of your life, basically. And no matter how much you try to convince people that you have changed, some will not believe you, because you've already established the baseline that this is who you are, right? And so the way to, I mean, in a sense, that's the best type of I'm pretty sure that there is a few serial killers have been using that principle, where, and they have, what is it, Bundy or whoever it's called, I can't remember his name, but basically if you just see him as the nice person, or like you create a baseline of, no, this person is like very good looking or very well dressed, etc., etc., you can get away with atrocities, because nobody's going to be inclined to believe someone when it's a word against word. And that principle, playing that part, I'm not saying that you're as a serial killer, I'm just saying that that way of interacting with another human being, where you're basically just adjusting your personality regardless of what they say, because you can simply not trust your manager. Even if I've even had a coworker I talked to, which he was very frustrated over this, because he was telling me, like, you know, he's a nice guy, I would love to have like a bit of a back and forth with him, but I've told him basically that unfortunately I can't joke around with you, even if it's just you and me here in the workspace, because although I know that we're not really saying anything bad or like anything so forth, I don't want to get into that habit, because this is a professional environment and I can't risk getting into a habit of being loose with the way that I behave, because I know myself, where I will forget myself in an environment where we're like more people and so forth, and that's going to hurt my career. And he goes, and he's frustrated, of course, because he feels like me, yeah, but like that's like we're living in a police state, like it's all this bullshit, etc., etc. And I go, yeah, but that is the way of the world, where unfortunately you have to be able to work with people who cannot handle a joke, or cannot handle an in-depth conversation. The level of interaction you can possibly they can't see. It's like dealing with being in a race, where you have a bunch of where you all have to arrive at the same time, and then there's like fat people with you. They are not able to run as fast as you. And unfortunately, there's very little you can do about that, especially if they're in a position of power. And so what you have to do is you have to adjust to the environment that you find yourself in order to survive. That's pretty much it. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that I usually recover from a bad one-on-one is that make sure that I don't forget to be a happy donkey, and then I try to, and then it's about just like leave time, or like the removing tension, because usually when something bad happens, that's if you think about it as a line, you want the line to be as flat as humanly possible. Ideally, if you can make it like a positive line or something, like where you're doing good things and so forth, but it's hard to like always impress people. It's not always feasible. The thing that happens is usually that when something bad happens, you have a bad interaction, that goes away over time. Like you don't, as long as nothing else keeps on happening continuously, because it's usually better to quote unquote fuck up once really badly, perhaps, and then not for a very long time, than it is to continuously do small things that keep on arriving in the lap of your manager. Because if your manager is continuously seeing that you have all these small issues associated around you, they will build up, that builds a baseline of you being a problem person or someone who causes a lot of issues, and then it's basically impossible for you to get back from that, because you've already established a history of being this sort of individual. And that's usually that's the truth that I've seen, at the very least. It's what is it? It's Machiavelli who says that if you're going to be a monster, be a monster. You be very decisive. in what you do. Like do the thing that you need to do. If you're going to fuck up or you're going to do something really bad, do it and then let people forget about it. Because if you continuously do it a little bit, that's going to stick with people and cause a lot more problems. Have a great day.